Okay, so this is a typical ginger jar and a ginger jar lid. A ginger jar lid fits down over a raised lip. Okay, it's a pretty traditional shape. It's a pretty traditional lid. Now you can use the same technique to go a little bit less ginger jarry, and if you put a lid on it, or I'm sorry, if you put a knob on it, it doesn't really count as a ginger jar, but it does make it a little bit easier to handle. So that's a possibility. So again, the ginger jar lid is basically thrown upside down. It's a little bowl that goes over. Now notice on this pot, I did not make this pot, I bought this pot. There's no glaze right there, so this is actually fired separately. Most pots, you're better off if you fire the lid and the pot together. So you've got to think about how you're going to glaze those. Okay. So this one, like some of the others, the pot is different. You've got to have a specialized lip to make this work. And just like all the others, your pots must be wet when you measure, otherwise they're not going to fit. If you're not going to make the lid right away, measure it and then mark that measurement on the inside of your sketchbook and make sure that you make a note as far as what it is. It's also a good plan, that way if you break your lid at some point, you've got the measurement. I suppose I could talk during this, but I'm going to cut that off there. I got that lip a little taller than what I wanted. Maybe I'll bring it up a little taller. If you get the pot too thin and you end up with really thin shoulders right here, it can collapse, so you got to be careful. I'm preoccupied, so I did get a little bit thin, so we'll see what happens. I'm going to collar that in. Sometimes I get lucky. You see it sunk a little bit. Again, I got that shoulder really thin, and it's got to support quite a bit of weight, so I got to be careful. Now right now that shoulder is very slopey. I don't want a slopey shoulder. I know that sounds goofy, but I don't want a slopey shoulder. I'm going to bring it in a little bit lower. I'm going to bring that over, and I'm just going to cut my losses there because I really was not paying attention. And see, when I got it really thin, it just wants to die. I'm going to cut that whole section off. You can see I got that really thin. Preoccupation when you're throwing is not good. Things don't turn out all that successfully. So I'm going to collar that in. I'm going to make a much smaller pot than I planned. I could reshoot this, but that's okay. It's good for you to see. So I'm going to start out rounder this time. So it's going to be a little ginger jar. Or at least a little one with a lid that sits on the outside. That looks much better. So it needs to come in. The lid is going to sit on the top there. And I need to make a nice crisp seat right there. Again, I could use the back of my needle like I have on other ones, or I could use my scraper. I'm going to angle that in. Again, kind of almost a 45-degree angle, not quite. Cut off a little bit of excess. Your piece does not need to be this small, but again, in fact, it really shouldn't be. I just was not paying attention. You can see where that got me. we go. Now most of the other lids, I measured the inside of the pot and the outside of the lid. This I need to measure the outside of the pot. And I also need to get rid of, again, any clay that's sticking out there because that's going to make my lid not fit. So this is very tiny. I'm going to measure the outside. So I measured right there, the bottom outside of that lip, right as it meets the pot. Okay, so much smaller than some of my other ones. So I'm going to set that aside. And this really truly is a little tiny bowl. That's all I'm making, a little tiny bowl. So again, I'm throwing off the hump. I don't need this whole chunk. It's actually hard to center something this small by itself, so I like it better throwing off the hump when I'm making lots of little things. And lids qualify as little things. So again, just a tiny little bowl. Not quite that tiny apparently. I'm going to bring it out a little bit. And just a little bit of water, make it a little bit slicker. Again, you should hair dry it. And you can push that back in if you want to, or you can just wait and trim it. I actually push it back in. I find it a little bit easier. Again, that's so much safer if you hair dry it just until it's not sticky. So I've got my little lid that's going to fit down inside there. Okay. So now I've got my little tiny ginger jar, and I have hair dried it some, and I've got it upside down. Again, that looks really icky, so I need to make sure, again, hair dry some. I didn't hair dry it really enough, but then you need to come back, again, picturing how thick that is, and dome that, clean that up, make that really nice and clean. I'm going to trim that. And I should probably have let that dry a little bit more. I'm kind of rushing things so I can get all of these demos done for you. Which is not the best idea, but at least it gives you a little something to work with. Once again, the pot is acting as a chuck. You can also use a chuck for footing a narrow-necked pot. But it works really well to use your pot as a chuck, as that form on which to trim. Otherwise you've got to anchor your lids and they tend to get all gross. Generally not what you're aiming for. Now for this trimming I'm using the large double end loop tool. That works really well. Make sure you use the larger one, or at least the smaller one with a sharper edge. It's got a little wiggle to it here. It's almost like I cut it off when it was still wet. Oh wait, I did. See, it's still a little wet, so I can end up making that not really round, and that'll make it not quite fit right. So again, rushing does not make a better piece. Make sure you're really thinking craftsmanship, because if it's not fitting right, if you're getting it uneven, if you're making it not circular, again, you're spending time on something that's not going to be worth the end result. And it's very possible these lidded examples may not end up getting fired. They're really just examples because I wanted to get all 5 of them done in the limited amount of time that I had. So I'm cutting some corners that I don't want you to cut. Specifically, getting them dry enough to not have them get ruined. Because my pieces are just a little bit rushed and a little bit too wet, which can deform them and make everything stick and be really gross. Okay, so there's my little ginger jar. I'm going to make a little kind of a spiral around the top there. Alright, and again you want to trim the bottom just like on any pot, but I always trim the lid first so that my pot is as stable as it can be. But again, make sure that you're trimming. Rookie mistake is just letting the pots be and not actually trimming anything. So unless you're throwing just beautifully and you've got no extra thickness at the bottom, then you're okay. Alright, so again, there's my kind of ginger jar kind of thing. And again, fairly rushed. I can't say that's my finest piece ever, but you get the idea.